All right, so we're diving into some fascinating data out of Taiwan today. We're talking public opinion, geopolitics, like all that stuff colliding in a place where the stakes are, well, about as high as they can get.
Yeah, no kidding. And what's interesting here is we're getting a chance to hear directly from the Taiwanese people, right? This isn't just, speculation or some expert analysis from afar. We've got this recent opinion poll from the United Daily News, one of Taiwan's major newspapers, and it gives us a pretty good snapshot of how they're viewing this whole balancing act between mainland China and the U.S.
Okay, so bottom line, what's the headline here?
Well, it looks like a full 66%, two-thirds of Taiwanese, feel strongly that their country should really resist any pressure to pick sides.
Between the U.S. and China.
Exactly. They're aiming for that neutral corner, which, in what feels like an increasingly intense boxing match.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to stay neutral these days, it seems like.
It really is, and it's fascinating how this neutral stance cuts across party lines, too.
Yep.
Even if you look at supporters of the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, which, if you follow Taiwan, they've historically been more in favor of independence from mainland China, even a lot of those voters are sticking with this neutrality idea.
Right, so it's like, we see you, we hear you, we appreciate the potential support, but we got to chart our own course.
It definitely seems that way.
And speaking of, you can't really talk Taiwan without addressing the elephant in the room, I guess you could say, which is mainland China. This poll, it showed heightened concern, right, about the potential for, military action.
For sure. It's there, but I wouldn't say it's like full-blown panic just yet. I mean, people are definitely aware and understandably cautious, but for the most part, they're saying the risk hasn't really jumped significantly in the past year.
So a measured awareness, not, like you said, hitting the panic button. Which is interesting because this very same poll shows that a huge number, almost 3/4, want to up Taiwan's defense spending, like right now. And again, that's across party lines.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes right back to that idea of charting their own course, right? They see the situation, they know they're in a tricky spot, but they're not just sitting back and hoping for a rescue. There's a real sense of, okay, let's invest in ourselves and our security. Let's be proactive about our own destiny.
Yeah. That's a powerful message. But it does make you wonder, what's really driving that kind of self-reliance? Is it pure military strategy? Or are there deeper things at play here, cultural factors, economic concerns, all of that?
See, and that's what I find really interesting, because this poll, it gives us the what, right? It tells us people want to stay neutral, they're concerned about China, they want to boost defense, but it doesn't really dig into the why.
It's like we're missing half the story.
Right. Like, how much does Taiwan's economy, which is so closely tied to both the U.S. and China, how much is that driving this neutral stance? What about historical ties, cultural connections? There's just so many layers here to peel back.
Yeah, it's like we've got the answers, but then we need answers to the answers, right?
Totally. And those deeper motivations, well, that's where it gets really interesting.
So where do we even start with that?
Well, take that whole neutrality thing we were talking about, right? Yeah, on the surface, it's like a pretty clear majority say that's the way to go. But if you dig a little deeper, you see something kind of interesting. The support for aligning with the U.S. still way bigger than aligning with mainland China.
So it's not like this absolute let's all be friends neutrality. It's more like strategic, I guess.
Yeah, walking a tightrope is probably a good way to put it. And you got to think that probably reflects just how complicated Taiwan's situation really is.
Yeah.
I mean, they're economically tied to both these superpowers. There's history with mainland China, obviously. But then there's this pull right towards the U.S., what it represents, the whole democracy thing. It's a lot.
Yeah, no kidding. Makes you really appreciate what a tough spot they're in. And speaking of tough spots, want to circle back to the whole U.S. military support question for a sec?
Sure. What about it?
Even if we just take the people who think, yeah, the U.S. would intervene, there's got to be a whole range of opinions, even within that, right? Like what that intervention actually looks like.
Oh, absolutely. This poll, it's like a 10,000-foot view, which is useful, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it can't really get into the weeds of what that involvement would actually mean on the ground.
Yeah.
What it costs, who benefits, what Taiwan's role is, all of that. Way too complex for a yes or no.
It's not just will they show up. It's like, okay, now what?
Exactly.
Which, all this talk about complicated choices, it makes me think about this upcoming Taiwanese presidential election in early 24. I mean, this poll, it's basically a snapshot of the public mood right now, which candidates can't ignore that, can they?
No way. How they address this stuff, especially the China question, people are nervous, but then there's the economic realities. It's going to be fascinating to watch how they try to thread that needle.
Yeah.
Because it's bigger than just picking a leader, right? It's about what direction Taiwan's going to go in on the world stage.
And that choice, they're making it when things are shifting so fast globally.
Yeah, you got power dynamics changing all over, the economy's unpredictable, and then there's just the whole possibility of China. Well,
Is calculating.
that's one way to put it. Or worse. Can't really ignore that piece of the puzzle.
Definitely not. And it kind of brings it all back home, you know? Why it matters that we're trying to understand how the Taiwanese people see all of this. Because it's not just, oh, do they support this policy or that policy? It's real life, right? Like, their actual lives are on the line here.
No doubt about it. And I think it's easy to forget that sometimes when we're looking at these big global issues. But at the heart of it, yeah, it's people, families, communities. It's their future.
Really puts things in perspective.
It does, doesn't it? And it brings us back to this poll, this like little window we've got into what people in Taiwan are thinking and feeling right now. Valuable for sure, but
Just a starting point.
exactly.
Yeah.
We've nudged the door open, but there's a whole world behind it we haven't even glimpsed yet. So many more questions to ask, like whose voices aren't we hearing in this poll? What perspectives are we missing?
Because sometimes it's those quieter voices, the ones we don't always hear right away, that have the most insightful things to say.
100%. It's about making those connections, getting from the what to the why, and never forgetting that, yeah, geopolitics is fascinating and all, but it's people's lives we're really talking about. Their stories are what matter most.
Well said. It's a reminder to all of us, I think, to stay curious, stay engaged, keep learning, and never, ever look at these global events and just see statistics or headlines. Because behind it all, there are real people trying to build a future in Taiwan and everywhere else. Now, that's something worth paying attention to.